7th, 2024 planning.
In progress.
Sorry. Welcome to the March 7th, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. I will call the hearing to order at 1:03 p.m. Ms. Johnson, can we please have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. I'll take roll call vote. Chair Bauke is absent. Vice Chair Wardlow?
Here.
Commissioner Barnwell?
Here.
Commissioner Boss?
Present.
Commissioner DeLuccio? Commissioner Lodge?
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. We will start with preliminary matters. Ms. Arciniega, do we have any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of agenda items?
Vice Chair Wardlow, we have none.
Thank you. Ms. Arciniega, do we have any announcements or appeals?
Vice Chair Wardlow, we do. We received an appeal for 101 Garden, the hotel project, and that will be coming to the City Council once we find a date.
Thank you. We will now move on to item C, review, consideration, and action on the following: the February 15th, 2024 Planning Commission minutes and Planning Commission resolution number 002-24 for 2020 Alameda Padre Serra. Do any of my fellow commissioners have any questions or edits on either of these two?
I'll move both items.
Do we have a second?
Second. I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. I'll take roll call vote. Commissioner Boss?
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yes.
Vice Chair Wardlow?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And that takes us to comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. Ms. Johnson, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips. If you do wish to speak on an item or on general business, so that's anything not on today's agenda, you can fill out a speaker slip at the back of the room. I'm not seeing any movement. We also do not have any virtual participants at this time, but we did receive written correspondence from Suzanne Wood, which was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Vice Chair Wardlow.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We will now close general public comment. We will move on to new items on the agenda, item A, where we will receive an update on the Santa Barbara Airport Master Plan. We have Airport Land Development Manager Sarah Issa here to give the presentation. Ms. Issa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. Director Hassert will be giving the presentation.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you, Chair Wardlow and Commission members. Chris Hastert, Airport Director. Happy to be here to give you an update on our master plan progress. One of the things I'd just like to point out, we receive a lot of questions about what's been going on with all the flooding at the airport and closures and all of that. You're not going to hear a lot of talk about that at the master plan update right now, but we do have work in progress to provide further updates on that with a drainage master plan that is currently underway as well. And we have identified some hopefully short-term fixes that is being evaluated by that same consultant to hopefully avoid another closure in the future. So just to kick things off, we entered into this master plan process with the following guiding principles that are up on the screen. So we haven't lost touch with who we are here in Santa Barbara and what the guiding principles are for our local community as we go through this process that is funded by the FAA and has certain regulatory requirements that we have to meet. We also have applied that local Santa Barbara focus to our master planning efforts. I'd just like to do brief introductions of who our team members are. So as you already mentioned, Sarah Iza, our development manager to my left, Jessica Metzger, our project planner. And then in the audience, we have Brad Klinzing, our supervising engineer. And I think that is all that is here. We also have Tiana Herrera, our engineering tech who helps us out on the project. And in the audience is also Angie Doss, who is our marketing supervisor who helps us with some of our messaging. On our consultant team, we have a really good team that was put together, led by Mead and Hunt. And so we have Corbett Smith, who's working the computer over here and will be speaking in just a minute, our project manager with Mead and Hunt, as well as Hardy Bullock, who is our deputy project manager, and Brian Moore, who is not with us today, and a number of sub-consultants that are working on the project, Rincon helping with some of the environmental effort, Unison Consulting, with some of the financial look at all of the projects, and V5 with GIS, excuse me, and Walker Consultants, who helps us to look at parking. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corbett Smith with Mead and Hunt, who's going to go through the process that we've been through and where we're at right now.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. As Director Hastert mentioned, my name is Corbett Smith, Mead and Hunt's project manager, undertaking this master plan update. For the agenda, we'll talk about the master plan as a whole process, where we are in that timeline, and then we'll talk specifically about our recommended alternatives and the preferred development concept. We'll touch on some high-level cost estimates associated with those projects, and we'll close with the projected noise contours associated with the future 20 years. So this graphic really depicts the entirety of a master plan process, starting on the left with an inventory of everything on the airport. Then we conducted an environmental overview, identifying where the environmental constraints are on the airport. We then developed 20-year forecasts of where we predict the airport will be as far as activity and passengers in 20 years. We then conducted a facility requirements analysis, which is essentially a gap analysis between what exists today and what would be needed to meet that 20-year forecast. We then developed a series of preliminary alternatives to meet those facilities we identified for improvements. We're at the point now where we're with a series of recommended alternatives and conducting the land use planning and financial analysis components of the master plan, where we're developing the noise contours. We'll conclude with an update to the airport layout plan, which is one of two items that's explicitly approved by the FAA, the other being those forecasts that I mentioned earlier in the process. Throughout the entire master plan, we've had a very robust stakeholder and public outreach component. We had a series of 4 meetings with a technical input committee as well as a community input committee. Those concluded yesterday. We've also had public open houses, one earlier in the project. The second will be tonight, and we'll conclude with a third at the end of the project. And we've also had decision maker hearings with this body, the City Council, and the Airport Commission. So I think it's important that we all get on the same page as to what a master plan actually is and is not. As I mentioned, it is a 20-year planning document. Airports often complete them every 5 to 10 years or so, or whenever conditions warrant. It's a document that looks at those capital improvement projects and the land use compatibility between them. It's sponsored and partially funded by the FAA, and it needs to meet FAA standards. It is focused on the long-term planning for the airport. It is not a business plan or a marketing plan. The airport has other mechanisms to accomplish that. It is not a wish list or a funding guarantee. Projects shown in the master plan and on the airport layout plan need to be realistic and justified. And it's not a binding document. The airport can modify and amend these plans as necessary in the future. It is not a document that sets policies or rates. And importantly for this discussion, it's not an engineering level document or a blueprint for development. These are planning concepts, essentially reservations of area on the airport where things might best fit throughout the next 20 years. So one of the first big picture items that we needed to tackle was what's the ultimate runway configuration look like at the end of the 20-year planning period. Alternative 1 on the left side of the screen is essentially the status quo, 3-runway system. Alternative 3 on the right-hand side is an alternative we ultimately discarded, a single runway system. Alternative 2 in the middle, our recommended alternative, is a 2-runway system. And the primary driver for the rationale behind that recommendation is the eligibility of funding from the FAA for multiple runways. There's a variety of criteria that the FAA has established for when the FAA will fund runways, maintaining them throughout the future. At Santa Barbara, the airport does not meet the requirements by the FAA to fund 3 runways throughout the future. So that is not to say that the airport needs to go out tomorrow and close a the third runway, just that the FAA will not contribute funds to maintaining that. So we took some high-level cost estimate look at what that might be over the next 20 years if the airport were indeed to maintain a third runway, but do so out of its own pocket. It would be approximately $9 million over the next 20 years. So then we took a look at the terminal, and there's a terminal improvement project underway as we speak, but we wanted to look at a very long-term picture and ensure that the airport plans accordingly beyond the 20 years. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a table that's a summary from the approved forecasts, and that projects 878,000 annual enplanements in the year 2041. An enplanement is simply a single person boarding an aircraft. If you want to think about total passengers, you roughly double that number. But we wanted to provide a very comprehensive view of the long term, so we established in our facility requirements chapter what we call planning activity levels, or PALs, and specifically PAL 3, which represents a number beyond the 20-year period. We don't expect this in the next 20 years, but if demand continues and you approach this near the end of the 20-year period, what would the airport need to have in place to accommodate that level of demand, specifically 1.1 million annual enplanements? And our analysis concluded to accommodate that 1.1 million, the airport would need a total of 8 gates with boarding bridges and an additional 34,000 square feet of terminal space beyond the terminal improvement projects underway today. That 8 gates is still the total. That's not in addition to the terminal improvement projects now. And then what we show on the screen here is this preferred alternative, again, for the very long term, beyond the planning period, more of a reservation of space on the airport. And it's essentially a new concourse that would accommodate 8 gates rather than progressing in the southern direction as the terminal is now. It's already a very constrained quadrant of the airport. And if indeed that runway 15 left, 33 right is closed in the future, it would allow terminal expansion to the west out into the infield and move away from that very constrained corner. So again, this is a very high-level concept of what that may look like in a broad sense, of how it might fit together, but it would accommodate 8 gates, 2 remain overnight positions, and accommodate that 1.1 million in-plane passengers. Then related to the terminal, we also identified some improvements that could be made along the terminal curb front for circulation efficiency improvements. The preferred alternative is really a combination of 2 or 3 minor improvements, but combined into one recommended alternative, and that would include additional signage, marking, wayfinding, and messaging as to how to better utilize underutilized portions of the curb today. We'd also recommend separating the 2 lanes, one curb dedicated to a pickup area, the other curb being dedicated to drop-off, and then a slight modification to the short-term parking lot to have a dedicated area for TNCs, which are transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. Having a dedicated area for them in the short-term parking lot would free up some of the usage of the curb for the traveling public. We've estimated all these improvements could be made for relatively inexpensive $50,000 or so, not including design fees. And then we also looked closely at what general aviation improvements would be needed at the airport over the next 20 years. The forecast that I mentioned that's approved by the FAA projects that there will be 44 additional aircraft coming to make their home at Santa Barbara Airport over that time frame. Our recommended alternative is a variation of different sizes and locations of general aviation hangars that could be built on the northwest and east quadrant of the airport. It gives the airport flexibility to respond to demand, however that materializes in the future. There's also a component that I'll talk about on a slide in a moment, but there's an FBO redevelopment project that's underway in the northeast quadrant. That's being conducted outside of the master plan, but it's assumed in this master plan that part of the general aviation demand throughout the next 20 years would also be accommodated in those two new FBOs leasing two large parcels in the northeast quadrant. And we also looked at improvements to the fuel system. There's been supply chain interruptions in the past and shortages have occurred. The existing location for the fuel farm system is very well suited to accommodate expansion. The airport could easily double its capacity in its existing location. We've also show some improvements for the vehicle access road entering that point. And this location could also accommodate sustainable aviation fuels if or when the demand materializes for those fuels. Our cost estimates are about $8.7 million for those improvements. And then on a more exciting side of aviation, the concept of eVTOLs, which are electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, is a new entrant into the aviation world, and we think Santa Barbara Airport is very uniquely situated to potentially receive some demand and potentially operations by these aircraft in the future. And as this is a planning document, it would be prudent to identify somewhere on the airport to accommodate them if indeed they do arrive. So we looked at a number of sites, but this site on the screen was the only one that accommodated all of the FAA siting criteria, and it could be constructed for approximately $2.7 million. Coming out of our community input meetings, we heard some comments about wanting to look closer at the land uses surrounding that vertiport site. So there's a lot going on the screen, but the colorful background is the city of Goleta's land uses just off the airport property near the vertiport. The vertiport is right here where my red laser is. And we're also showing the noise contours associated with activity at that vertiport at the end of the 20-year planning period. We'll talk a bit more about noise in a moment. We did receive some additional input yesterday that there's potentially an overlay, a residential overlay zone that we'll be looking at as well down here. And then on the side of auto parking over the next 20 years, there's two components to the demand that we are going to need to accommodate. One is demand from the traveling public over the next 20 years as that increases, but also a relocation of the demand or the users that currently use the remote economy parking lot. The airport has long-term plans to discontinue using that lot. So combining the stalls in that lot with the projected passenger demand, we get approximately 1,250 parking stalls needed over the next 20 years. The recommended alternative to accommodate that is a 3-story parking garage immediately south of the existing terminal, where my red laser is now. And then on the right-hand side is a conceptual floor plan of what one of the levels may look like in that parking garage. Costs for that are estimated about $45 million. And then this graphic is our preferred development concept. It combines all of those components that I just spoke about and fits them together in an organized fashion on the airport. This will ultimately be a piece of what gets put onto the airport layout plan and submitted to the FAA. There are also taxiway geometry changes proposed throughout the airport. One major one is in conjunction with the closure of that runway 15 left, 33 right. We'd propose constructing a new parallel taxiway to serve the remaining 15 33 runway. Some other changes in the taxiway system are geometric in response to FAA design criteria in the intent of increasing safety and reducing the chance that pilots inadvertently taxi onto a runway. Also on this graphic is the FBO redevelopment areas that I mentioned in the northeast quadrant. So these are the two large areas where the airport's working with FBOs to lease those outside of the master plan. And then we'll talk now a bit about noise. First, it's important to understand what these noise contours mean and represent. These are not what people hear on the ground. This doesn't factor in annoyance that people may experience from aircraft overflying their house. These are strictly a mathematical metric that is in the approved format that the FAA specifies for conducting land use compatibility. The outermost line here, the black contour on the left side of the screen, is the baseline contour from the prior master plan, representing year 2011. In blue is the baseline contour from this master plan update, representing year 2021, and then the green dashed lines are the future 20-year contour of this master plan, representing year 2041. So you will notice that there is a change and a decrease, in fact, in this metric of noise depicted. There are a couple big reasons for that. One being that the total number of operations assumed in the prior master plan in 2011 were higher than what the airport is experiencing in the base year of this master plan. The other side of that coin is the change in fleet mix. Airlines have been changing the aircraft that they operate, how they operate at this airport, specifically flying larger aircraft that handle and accommodate more passengers than the fleet that was assumed in the prior master plan. On that same vein is a change in aircraft technology. The fleet that was assumed in the prior master plan is much older, is for the most part not flying to Santa Barbara anymore, and has been replaced by newer, quieter, more fuel-efficient aircraft. A couple of other points on here worth noting in the northeast quadrant is that circular area that I mentioned in relation to the vertiport. So those are contours that reflect operations we assume would occur there, approximately 3,000 vertiport operations by the end of the 20-year planning period, and the noise contours reflect that as well. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Director Hastert.
I can go ahead and finish up the slides if you want, then we can get to questions in the end. As you've seen on there, there's a lot of high dollar tickets items for capital improvements. Not all of those would necessarily be funded by the city of Santa Barbara. We do participate in the airport improvement program through the FAA with grants, and so any eligible project with coordination with the FAA could potentially be funded at 90.66%, so it's just a less than a 10% match for the airport. In addition, we mentioned FBOs. For those that aren't familiar with what an FBO is, it's a fixed base operator. It's the people that handle the corporate aircraft coming in and out of the airport. So Signature Aviation, Atlantic Aviation are our two current FBOs. So things like the fuel farm, other things could be potentially private investment coming into the airport as well. We also are looking at sustainability. So the Santa Barbara General Plan's mission statement is living within our resources. So obviously we'll be following the local coastal program, incorporating sea level rise data. We're currently doing a sea level rise adaptation study, examining aircraft electrification as things progress forward with modernization of that type of fleet and sustainable aviation fuels, and updating our recycling, reuse, waste, and reduction plan as a part of this master plan. Our recommendation for the commission today is only that the Planning Commission receive a briefing on the Santa Barbara Airport Master Plan update. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know there is a lot of new ideas that are floating out there regarding the runway and terminal, so happy to answer any of those questions.
Thank you, Director Hastert. We really appreciate this presentation. At this point, we're going to go to public comment from the audience, and then we'll turn over to the commission for their questions. Ms. Johnson, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips for this item, but if you do wish to speak in person, you can fill out a speaker slip at the back of the room. I'm not seeing any movement. We also do not have any virtual participants at this time, and we didn't receive any written correspondence for this item, so I'll turn it back over to you, Vice Chair Wardlow.
Thank you. We will now close public comment on this item. I will now turn it over to my fellow commissioners for questions. I see Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm loaded with questions, but I'll only hit a couple of them. Back in the day, there was an airport restaurant open to the general public in that little building up on top, and it was cute. And when we built the new airport, we don't really have kind of a general restaurant for people, which is too bad, but there's probably a real reason for that. But have you considered a restaurant there?
Thank you, Chair Wardlow and Commissioner Barnwell. This is a question that comes up very often, and obviously that restaurant is severely missed in this community. So as a part of our terminal improvement program, we are actually looking to add another restaurant within the terminal. That does not solve the exact issue that you're describing, because it would be post-security with the TSA. But we are also looking at other programs that other airports have in place that would allow you to get a pass to go through and go to the restaurant, even if you're not necessarily traveling that day on the airline. We don't currently offer that service, even for the one restaurant that we have in the terminal, because it wasn't designed for the level of passenger activity that we currently have, and the terminal is a little bit crowded right now, so we don't want to add more to that. So we are looking into that. I also wanted to mention our terminal improvement project is underway right now to meet the current demand, and that demand is already at about 660,000 in-plane passengers. So we are well on our way to those planning activity levels. We do think that that will start to level off a little bit with Delta Airlines, the last major carrier, coming back in June. There's not a lot of other carriers to start adding a lot of additional service. In addition to the terminal restaurant, we also have the old restaurant on the north end of the airport that is not currently in operation either. That's the area that the FBO redevelopment will take place. And we have heard word from a lot of people in the community and elected officials that would like our FBOs to look into potentially putting in some type of a restaurant or gathering place for the community as a part of that project. And then that also leaves some other areas on the airport that we would consider restaurants, but definitely high on the top of our list of requests from the community.
Well, thank you, because you used the word post and pre. Every time I go down there, I'm always looking for a little place for me, who's not traveling, I'm picking someone up, to go. And there isn't one. There's a very little marginal coffee shop that frequently does not operate. And I think you're maybe missing a bet there, if nothing else, just for the income stream. Bird strikes. Nobody's talked about bird strikes. That was a big deal. Are there no longer concerns about bird strikes?
So, Commissioner Barnwell, we obviously are always very concerned about bird strikes. We have a robust wildlife program in our operations division for reporting, trying to scare birds away, working with our air traffic control tower. Having the Goleta Slough right next to us, there's always a lot of birds and other creatures in the area. So definitely a concern of ours, but currently being managed very well and not a major impact to our airport.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear the long-term parking may at some point include a parking structure, because clearly, as you guys know, you're a little underparked. You said that, did I understand this correct? The employment's going to go to 1,100,000 is going to be the number of employments. Is that correct?
So, Commissioner Barnwell, that is not what we're showing in our forecast. So this master plan covers 20 years. So I believe the forecast number was 875,000. That's where we're predicted to be at the end of the 20-year project. But we wanted to look beyond that to make sure that we reserve the space that may be required should something change. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to build that facility, and obviously as growth occurs at the airport, we would be looking to see when is the right time to add on to that, and it wouldn't necessarily be something that's added on all at one time either.
So now I'm going to get to the nut of the crunch of all this. When we just had a meeting, our last meeting, where in the approval of a hotel, we were concerned about the housing that was going to be provided by the hotel operators for their new employees. and the estimate of how many there would be in new employees, and then there's a term we use called linkage to link the concepts together and then provide either ownership or rental housing. Is that a part of your analysis of how many additional employees you will have and how we will provide housing for them?
So Commissioner Barnwell, it is a very close link. So as the community continues to grow, especially with tourism and hotels, that has a direct impact on the airport. So whatever facilities we have at the airport doesn't attract new airlines, doesn't attract new service. It's really the demand from the community. So as the community develops, if that continues to grow, that is what is driving those extra passengers coming in, and that's what's currently shown on the forecast. So if nothing changed from today, it's not likely that we would ever get to that 2041 number, but it's anticipated that there's going to be further development in the area.
Thank you. I'm not talking about passengers. I'm talking about the employees who work for the airport. Are you suggesting that the expansion of the airport does not include the idea that there will be more employees?
Thank you for the clarification on the question. So we would anticipate that there could be slightly more employees, but in honesty, most of the operations at the airport aren't dependent on the number of employees. So as more airline flights get scheduled, you might have to have a couple of additional crew. But we're currently operating almost 24 hours a day with adequate staff. So I don't anticipate a huge number of change for employees at the airport.
Okay, so I'm just saying out loud that consideration is something we typically look at. Regardless of whether or not the number of employees is a modest number, that is something that and that's us. We're talking about the city of Santa Barbara right now. So when we make these requests of private developers when they're going to add square footage, because you're adding a lot of square footage, and it isn't just the employments, it's the people who work there and the staff who works on the expansion, for example, of the FBOs. I mean, there's got to be staff people who maintain and work that. I think it would be to the city's advantage to begin to discuss that topic because we require it of everyone else.
Thank you. I think Ms. Isa has something else that she would like to add to that conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. So that would be an analysis in the CEQA document and EIR-EIS related to the project, related to growth-inducing impacts. And that was related to the last master plan EIR-EIS for the past terminal, and that included an evaluation of new employees related to the terminal.
Okay. Well, I wish you well. I'm really excited about it. As you know, in the planning world, we use the word gateway for how does the wide world see us. And downtown, the gateway is Carrillo Street and, Castillo and a few others. But the major gateway for this community is that airport. And it's glorious, it's beautiful. And I thank you for continuing to think about the expansion of it. Those numbers that you give about the expansion makes me wonder both, well, what kind of growth are you looking at the airport that would necessarily translate to the growth of the community itself, because there must be a tie-in between those, because your numbers are large.
Thank you, Commissioner, and that's what we are showing, actually more the opposite, which is the community is what really drives the growth at the airport.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the answers. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. Next, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for the presentation. I appreciate it. In the staff report, besides, I think you put it together, you talk about Santa Barbara Airport as a small hub airport. And I've been to several of the airport master plan updates before. And I'd just like you to describe for perhaps the audience and some new commissioners what that really means, a small hub airport, because to me it was it was a really big deal, and when I talked to someone in another community and said, we have a small hub airport, they go, oh my gosh, really? That's a really big deal. So there's a hierarchy. So I'd just like you to describe it, if you would, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. I'll let Sarah start with that and maybe pass it on to one of our experts as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. That's a great question. It's a new classification for SPA, and I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Smith to describe it further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the small hub designation is a term that the FAA uses. And really, all it has to do with is the percent of enplanements out of the whole country that are accommodated at Santa Barbara. So there are small, medium, and large hubs. Airports often move in and out of that category, depending on their enplanements for the year. It also does have some contribution as far as funding from the FAA to airport projects. I don't remember the percentage of enplanements of the nationwide total off the top of my head, but that's what determines the designation between small, medium, and large hub.
So, and when we're a small hub airport, that's a big deal because there's a lot of airports around that don't have that classification at all, right? That's what I understood last time we heard this presentation.
So thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. We've definitely reached a new level for
It's kind of a
our
milestone
airport.
for us, yes.
And,
Okay.
and like you said, there's not a lot of other small hub airports around us.
Right.
We're surrounded by primarily non-hubs until you get into the LA area.
Right, okay, great, thank you for that. And I was interested to hear that it had to do with the funding, too. I just wanted to ask a question about the funding. Last time we heard this, I was pretty astounded at the amount of FAA grant money that this airport receives for their program. So I wanted to talk about the runways, and the runway 15 left, 33 right. That's the one that's going to be closed, right? It's not closed yet, right? It will be closed. So does the funding by the FAA, first of all, does it relate only when you have 3 runways, you don't get the funding, right? That's what I thought you said?
So Commissioner Wiscombe, we are a part of the airport improvement program, and then there's also other programs, bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of other funding sources. So we do receive a certain amount of entitlement funds towards the airport based on passenger levels and things like that. So it doesn't, if we have 3 runways, it does not necessarily mean that we won't get any funding, but the 3rd runway would not be an eligible project. So we couldn't use any of that funding that comes in for that 3rd runway.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify, that, so it's not like we're stopped getting funding because we have 3 runways. It's okay. So, and when do you anticipate, how long will it be? Do you have to build a second brand-new runway, because you had that one with the really thick line, as opposed to the 2 skinny lines? So do you have to build a new second runway before you close the other 2? or-
Thank you, Commissioner. So we currently have 3 runways.
Right.
The master plan shows that 3rd runway just coming out of use. The existing 2nd runway would remain in the exact same place.
Okay.
We would have other taxiway infrastructure that would have to go in to connect to that runway and to the
Okay.
terminal, but we would not be constructing a new runway.
Okay, okay, good. I think, I guess I didn't really, maybe I missed it in, I had a question on, you talk about Mead and Hunt also provided draft environmental conditions chapter, and then they talk about additional deliverables for the master plan update here. They include an archaeological report, an airport recycling, reuse, and waste reduction plan. I don't have to go through with them all. The aircraft noise analysis would be interesting, but will all of these deliverables have a public comment period too?
So all of those deliverables will be available for public review, and Ms. Metzger might be able to speak to the timing for some of those being posted.
Okay.
But we do have more public meetings coming in the future as we wrap up this project, so it won't be specifically towards looking at those deliverables, but the entire master plan in its entirety, but there will be adequate time to review all of those deliverables to provide that comment.
Okay, and will that go through your community input committee? Is that part of
I believe we are wrapped up now with the Community Input Committee. We've gotten to that point where we've taken all of that feedback and are integrating it into the plan. So at this point, it would just be the community at large and the elected bodies who are reviewing the documents. But we will still have another public meeting in the future to review the entirety of the master plan with all of those deliverables included.
And the best way to keep up on when things come out on the schedule for the master plan is to sign up for our email list. So we send out e-blasts whenever we have meetings or have new documents on our website to review. And it's flysba.com/MPU for master plan update.
Okay, flysba.com /,
Yes.
yeah,
MPU.
MPU, yeah, master plan update. Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Metzger, I appreciate that. I think that's, I was particularly interested in that because of the noise study. The noise graph that you showed was really interesting because there were a lot of areas of reduction within even the airport outline, of where the airport actually is, the property line, I guess is what you call it.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. And if I might also add, so this is a noise analysis specific to the master plan and to those forecasts. Coming in the future, we've actually programmed with the FAA to also conduct a noise study. So that will go into much more detail on the noise impact as well.
Okay, but they use the same analysis, right? Because I think you said the analysis uses the FAA.
It is the FAA, but the Part 150 noise study goes into a lot more detail.
Okay, great, okay.
And
Thank you
also-
very much.
Also,
Sorry,
through
Ms.
the
Metzger.
chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, I want to let you know that we are working with the city of Goleta and the county to start a noise working group. And so if you sign up for that email list, you'll get notification of when we're doing recruitment for that, for the community.
Great, okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming and all the hard work you're doing. This is pretty exciting. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, we have Commissioner DeLucio.
Thank you. I want to start, this is the second time I'm hearing this presentation, since I am the liaison to the Airport Commission, and thank you very much. Seeing and hearing it a second time is good also. You can learn more from it. So, Ms. Mertzer, I hope I got your name correctly. She was kind enough to invite me last evening on a tour of the airport. The inner workings of it. Would that be possible for the other commissioners as well to?
Yes, through the vice chair. We want to make sure that everyone that's a decision-making body in these processes gets an opportunity to see the airport, not just the customer side that you see when you fly out, but also the back of house and the environmental conditions that we also own on our property. So I would invite anyone to email me, and I'll send my email to Ms. Johnson so you can get back to me. We'll find a couple times. It has to be only 2 people at a time because of the Brown Act, but we'd love to do that.
Okay, and by the projection for 2041 is 878,700 employments, I think, is the number. What is it today again?
We're currently at about 660,000 annual employments.
Okay.
So double that for total passengers.
Exactly, so it's not, and then the projection of 1.1 million is just a working number?
So that is a working number basically to reserve space on the airport. As we start to develop things like a parking structure or something, we don't want to limit ourselves for the future by where we select that to go. So we wanted to look beyond that 20-year period to make sure that whatever we're planning to meet that 20-year period doesn't impact our ability to meet the demand in the future.
Okay, and there'll be 8 gates as a projection. How many gates are there right now?
Thank you, Commissioner DeLucio. There are currently 8 gates, but they are not all jet bridge gates. So we have 4 jet bridge gates and 4 ground boarding gates. The ground boarding gates do not all accommodate every aircraft size, so they're a little bit limited and not as efficient as a jet bridge gate. The terminal improvement project will add 2 additional jet bridge gates.
And does the FAA pay for like 90% of the master plan? Or
That
how's?
was our grant, wasn't it? Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to verify, but yes, the FAA did pay for 90.66% of this master plan.
And is this master plan, the previous one was done about 10 years, is it 10 years old now?
2017
Okay,
was
is
the
this a
previous.
continuation of that plan, the master plan, incorporating stuff from the former plan, or it's not a brand-new plan?
So thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. It could be a brand-new plan if that was warranted, but in this case, it really is just the fact that our previous master plan hit some of those milestones as far as those projections that we needed to look at quicker than anticipated. So it's really an update to the master plan, not a lot of major changes other than looking at the funding issues with the runway, which has come up since that time.
Okay, and I have two more questions. The parking structure that you're going to eventually have is called out in your master plan of 1,250 parking spaces. The cost is $45 million. How is that funded?
So, Commissioner DeLuccio, there's a number of different funding sources. That would not be funded by FAA grants because it's revenue producing. It would not be eligible. A portion of that parking structure would accommodate rental cars, and we do have a customer facility charge that we are currently collecting that could be applied towards a portion of that structure, but it would be either financing reserves or bonds to fund that project.
Okay, thank you. And CEQA, the environmental work on it, would that be a totally new study, or would it be an amendment to the existing master plan study?
So I would ask Ms. Iza to address that question.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio, through the chair. So it would likely be a new EIR for this.
Okay, and this we would be the body that document would come before?
Yes.
To come, for review? And the other thing is, I know that Commissioner Barnwell was talking about the employees, and what we were talking about is employee housing for employees, and I think it had to do with a linkage fee. I think it's a commercial linkage fee we're talking about, which I believe the city doesn't have one at this time. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, Commissioner, the city does not have a commercial linkage fee at this time, but you all just approved our housing element, which has that as one of the goals. And I suggest that you put that at the top of your priority list, because then we can finally start collecting the money to put in the housing fund and build the houses.
Thank you. And those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question. On the slide with the land use map and the airport overlay, you mentioned or acknowledged the potential residential overlap on the other side of, the south side of Fairview. And it sounds like, yes, that one. Thank you. So it's magenta about midway, yes. So my understanding is that the commercial operator there is considering affordable or workforce housing. So if that were to move forward in the next few years, how would that impact airport operations?
Do you want it? I'll pass that to Ms. Iza.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss, through the chair. That is the specific area that we were talking about that will have most likely the housing overlay. And that's what we're looking into, so we're not sure yet. This is very early in the planning process. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might add, the whole eVTOL is still an emerging industry. There's a lot of unknowns surrounding that, including we have put the approaches and departures that the FAA has provided guidance on, but it's likely that as these aircraft are put into use, there's going to be a lot of different ways to look at them.
And then further adding on, the developer of that has been put in contact with the FAA, who have different standards than just zoning, and so they're going to work on that as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, Commissioner Barnwell again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a developer already associated with that parcel? A specific developer?
We have someone reached out to us. So.
Thank you. What about the roads? I remember that the expansion of the airport several years ago caused the city of Goleta to sit up straight in their chair and ask for some mitigations associated with the increased traffic. And we funded all of the upgrades at the intersection of Hollister and Fairview. The roads that lead to the airport are still kind of funky. funny little turns and hard right turns and stuff like that. Does this, in its environmental considerations or in the expansion of the number of emplacements, does it consider the access roads and improvements of them?
You want to take that, or you want me to? Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. We have not looked at the traffic impacts yet for this particular master plan update, and we would through the environmental review process.
So I'm not sure I understand. Are we going to look at the impact
Yes.
on roads?
Yes.
That's excellent. Also, if I remember correctly, some of the real estate property, some of the condominiums that are to the west under the flight path have actual deed restrictions that prohibit those owners from filing a lawsuit against the city for the noise. And I'm wondering how forward-thinking we're going to be with regard, for example, the VTOL site and the increased noise there, and how do we plan on and try to prevent some of those new parcels who will then experience new noise? How are we approaching that? Environmentally, I guess would be the term.
So Commissioner Bardwell, well, obviously there's a lot to be understood about eVTOL. They're all going to be electric aircraft. We're not even sure exactly what the noise levels are going to be yet, but we treat them the same as any other aircraft and any other development around the airport. If there's new development around the airport and it warrants, we will request a navigation easement be placed with that property as well. But specifically concerning the eVTOL, it's very preliminary. We're reserving a space for it right now, but there's so much unknown that it's hard to answer any questions specifically.
And if I read your report correctly, you guys are mostly concerned, you guys and gals are most concerned with the airport component, not all the other land that is in the airport. Is that correct? I mean, you mentioned, were you talking about the Elephant Bar when you mentioned earlier that there may be a new leasing there? And what about the properties across Hollister to the north? Are those part of this larger discussion you're coming up with?
So Commissioner Barnwell, the master plan covers all of the aviation activities at the airport. So it's a little bit confusing because the old Elephant Bar does fall into that area.
Oh, it does?
Not because of the uses of the restaurant. It's actually in part of where the FBO relocation area is. But everything on the north end of Hollister is through the standard city processes with a specific plan. It's not a part of this master plan.
Okay, and then my last question, the airport offices, God love them, but they're kind of small themselves. If you're expanding everything else, are you going to be looking at those buildings and getting some more square footage?
So thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. We don't necessarily look to add square footage. Our current building works fairly well for us, but we do have an issue with our building being right in the middle of where the FBO relocation will come. So we will most likely relocate. I don't know that it will include a growth in square footage, but we will relocate to an existing building on the airport as well.
But you haven't really focused on that right here, not in this at least.
It's a current use that is not different from what's in the master plan, so it's not a proposed new building.
But it will be someday, right? You're
No,
hoping-
it's
you're
an
hoping so.
existing building on airport already. It's on the northwest corner, there's where Deckers used to be. It's currently a vacant building
Oh,
over
yes,
there.
yes. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to all this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. I was glad to hear that you're able to take steps now to prevent future shutdowns of the airport because of flooding. I was curious about the vertiport. There's obviously helicopter traffic in and out of the airport now. What is different about a vertiport?
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. The vertiport is really focused on a new emerging technology, which is these eVTOL aircraft that Mr. Corbett explained. So it's very different type of activity than helicopters. And so we do have some helicopter pads on the airport that are used very regularly. These are, because it's such new technology, the FAA is anticipating that areas like Santa Barbara could shuttle either cargo or up to 6 passengers in each one more often than helicopter use. And so we would want a dedicated place for that to occur. but it also is not your typical operation. It's more along the lines of the airline terminal, because you have passengers who aren't necessarily specifically related to the ownership of the aircraft or the operation of the aircraft like a helicopter might be.
Okay.
And I think Ms. Isa would like to add something as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge, for the question. Also, I wanted to point out that the alternatives chapter in the master plan update has, I believe it's 6 alternatives for eVTOL. So we haven't gone through a complete land use analysis with regards to the eVTOL. So it will be an interesting analysis when we get to the environmental review portion, when we look at land use. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Well, thank you all for all of your questions. I think my questions have been answered. I specifically was interested in the new technology EV aspect, as you guys presented on this last time, and it seems pretty exciting. But I have no further questions. So before I open up the floor for deliberations, given there's no specific action requested on this item, is there any specific kinds of feedback that you'd like to hear from this commission before we go to comments?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. Obviously, we're wanting any feedback that you would have for this document coming back to you in the future, but also just as community members and looking at what our airport does for this community and how we can better improve the airport to meet the needs of what you see as private citizens in the area, but also with this document coming back to your body.
Great. Well, thank you. I will now turn to my fellow commissioners for comments and feedback. Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think something that would be of interest to me, at least as a general community member, but when you come back, I think one of the last presentations, you reported on archaeological and also environmental, and specifically your relationships with the native groups, so with Chumash specifically. That's at least of interest to me, just knowing where the airport is located, so anything around there would be, I think, beneficial.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to express my appreciation and thanks to all of you. I agree with Commissioner Boss. I also wanted to add, I think I've done some work at SeaTac Airport, and there's Commissioner Barnwell mentioned bird strikes. So I think it would be interesting to inform the public about if it still exists, I did it quite a while ago, but the FAA zone where you can't have plants that attract birds, and you can't have, and then that relationship to the Goleta Slough, which is an important environmental component for us, and how you manage that. I think that would be, I know that could be a whole meeting. I'm not trying to, but I think that's an important discussion, because I know that you're in constant contact and dialogue with Goleta regarding the slough and what goes on. So that would be just one thought. I think from a community perspective, that would be interesting to hear. I'd certainly like to hear about that. And other than that, I thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, Commissioner Barnwell.
Apologize for talking too much here, you guys, but I want to double down on what Commissioner Wiscombe said about the environmental issues. They were a very important topic back in the day, and I don't think they've gone away. And that discussion about the bird strikes, I think, is important, and it kind of calms the community's concern about it. We're watching it out. I think a brief discussion also just about the environmental history of the airport. I think everyone would find it interesting as to how we are preserving components of it. Some of the ammunition dumps that we've kept a couple of them. We also have, if I remember correctly, there's a view site, little 100 by 100 square foot little square thing, where you can, if you're a birder, you can sit there and look at birds and stuff. But it lacks any ambiance at all, and you have to look through the chain link fence to be able to see anything. Another toss-off to the community, particularly to the environmentalists in the community, might be to consider a raised platform or some other way in which a birder can occupy that space and not have to look through the chain link fence to observe the birds, because it ruins the whole experience there. And that was designed for the general public to take in the vistas of the whole place. Anyway, I think Commissioner Wiscombe is on to something there about that component. And you probably know that that was the biggest city in California when the Europeans showed up. Mescalite Island was the largest concentration of Indians, of Native Americans, excuse me. And I think it deserves a little comment, about how important that place is to the Chumash. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. Next, Commissioner DeLucio.
I just want to thank you for the progress report, and I think what's key here is, and I think you're doing that, is including the public and the stakeholders in the process in both Santa Barbara and Goleta. This is, I think, back in, 2011 is when you built out the current facility, and what was it, the employments then were about 300,000? And now,
That's probably a good estimate.
and now you're
looking
like
back.
more than double that, and you have projections to go into 1.1 million. So that's a good thing for us. But again, we need to be mindful of the community and the impacts. And finally, these guys have to go on a tour. I have not been on a tour yet, but this slough you're talking about, Goleta, and also the other concern obviously is the sea level rise and all that. I think maybe more of that can be addressed when you see the property and not only the airport but the surrounding property. So so I thank you for coming and giving us this update. And I think we're looking forward to the environmental work when you come forward with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was pleased to see that the contour line has shrunk for the noise impact, which is certainly a good thing. Is that mostly because of the improvements in engines and airplane designs?
It's Commissioner Lodge, it's a mix between the improvements to the aircraft and actually less operations. So fewer aircraft using the airport that are larger but accommodate more passengers.
Aha, okay. All right, thank you. I hope that more improvements can be made. I know that's not part of your work, but and for the impact on the community, I know it's been a big issue for the surrounding Goleta and so on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. And thank you all very much for this presentation. I think that as anyone that frequents the Santa Barbara Airport, we are all very, very lucky to have the airport that we have, and we're looking forward to seeing, the improvements that you all are very strategically and deliberatively planning. So thank you for this presentation, and thank you for your continued efforts to make our Santa Barbara Airport a special place.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow and Commissioners.
Thank you. Given there's no formal action required on this item, we will close this item out now and move to item B, 425 Allen Road. Sure. We're going to take a 5-minute break while everybody gets settled. So we will return at 2:10 or 2:09 p.m. Thank you. bit over past 2:09, so we're going to get started. So now the project, we are here to discuss item B, 425 Allen Road. This project is requesting a coastal development permit, an amendment to the conditions of approval of a subdivision, and a confirmation of the environmental analyst determination. Before we get started, do any commissioners have any ex parte communication that they need to disclose at this time? Great. We will now turn it over to Associate Planner Ms. Plummer for a staff presentation. Ms. Plummer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you said, I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara Planning and Zoning Division, and I'll be giving the staff presentation on this project. The property is located at 425 Allen Road. The project involves construction of a detached 1,000 square foot, two-story accessory dwelling unit, otherwise known as an ADU. And it's proposed to be located at the rear of an existing single-story residence. Other components of the project involve an extension of the driveway to allow for an uncovered parking space for the accessory dwelling unit, as well as landscaping, retaining walls, hardscape, and grading that are associated with construction of the ADU. And to the right is just a photo of the project site as viewed from Allen Road. So the required applications that are before the Planning Commission are a coastal development permit. So this is required for any accessory dwelling unit in the coastal zone. And this particular one is located in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, as well as an amendment to conditions of approval associated with the underlying subdivision, which I'll give a little history on in a minute. In terms of why this project is before the Planning Commission, ADUs generally are not reviewed by the Planning Commission. They are typically reviewed by the staff hearing officer without a public hearing pursuant to Government Code Section 65852.2. The staff report is prepared for those accessory dwelling units, showing that they comply with state legislation and the city's local ADU ordinance applicable to the coastal zone, and that decision constitutes the final action of the city. So as I mentioned, another part of your discretionary applications today is related to the condition amendment. So that is the particular reason why you're reviewing the coastal development permit and the amendment. To the right, you'll see an aerial shot showing the coastal zone jurisdiction. So the green overlay represents the non-appealable jurisdiction. The project site is outlined in yellow. The gold areas represent the appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone. Red represents the permit jurisdiction. A couple other things that I think are important to point out is Arroyo Burro Beach is in proximity to the project site. Elings Park is also within proximity, and Douglas Family Preserve. So as a little bit of background to the project, there's a pretty lengthy history related to the subdivision for 415 Allen Road, and actually even before March 3rd, 2011, which started the project for that subdivision. There was a 2009 application that was presented to the Planning Commission and subsequently by City Council for an initiation of a general plan amendment, rezone, and local coastal plan amendment. Council upheld the initiation for those amendments and the rezone if the applicant could demonstrate that future development of the proposed vacant parcel related to the subdivision could be designed to be a middle-income affordable unit, as well as compatible with the neighborhood. So in March 3rd, 2011, the Planning Commission reviewed the formal application for the subdivision for 415 Allen Road, which is just adjacent to the project site now. That project again included a general plan amendment, local coastal plan amendment for parcel B, 425 Allen Road, as well as a rezone for parcel B, a lot area modification for 415 Allen Road, and a tentative subdivision map and coastal development permit. Ultimately, Planning Commission denied that project largely because of the lot area modification for 415 Allen Road. The Planning Commission did not find that the modification was necessary per the required findings or meeting the intent of slope density based on the municipal code. Essentially that the intent was to provide more lot area for development on sloped parcels. This was subsequently appealed by the applicant on March 11th, 2011 to City Council. And on January 31st, 2012, City Council reviewed the appeal and ultimately upheld the applicant's appeal, approving the project subject to conditions of approval. And I do want to note, so the conditions of approval, which you would have received in your packets, as well as the minutes from Planning Commission and City Council, included some conditions for Parcel B, 425 Allen Road, which was then vacant. Those conditions were related to, again, City Council's direction that they wanted 425 Allen Road to be generally designed to be more affordable for the new unit in their design. So these development restrictions were proposed by the applicant, and I'll include a full summary of what those conditions were. But essentially, the Single Family Design Board then approved a design for 425 Allen Road in 2013. So these conditions for 425 Allen Road, which were recorded for the property, included that all development shall be between the 40-foot contour line and the public street, so Allen Road, and then a development limitation for a single-story residence, garage, driveway providing access, and hardscape, landscape, and other at-grade type of uses. Again, this limitation as part of the subdivision was really to make that unit more affordable in design for middle-income persons, and then to make it more compatible with the neighborhood, which is comprised mostly of 1- and 2-story residences. Since that time, accessory dwelling units, as you know, have become part of development options for residential properties in the city of Santa Barbara, as well as throughout the country in California. So they are allowed to be developed on properties with a single-family residence as an accessory unit to the primary residence. Civil Code 714.3 has include restrictions on ADUs, and effectively what that says is that a covenant, condition, or instrument that either effectively prohibits or unreasonably restricts the construction or use of an ADU or junior accessory dwelling unit on a lot zoned for single family that meets the requirements of state law is void and unenforceable. So the applicant is requesting your discretionary approval for condition amendments, again, to remove the restriction limiting development to just the residence, garage, driveway, and hardscape improvements, to allow construction of an ADU, which is allowed per state law, as well as the location to be to exceed the area of 40-foot contour line in the public street. This is an aerial view of the project site. So this is the existing single-story residence. This is the existing driveway. You'll see this is the location where they're proposing a uncovered parking space to serve the accessory dwelling unit. There's some stairs that are proposed here, and you'll see on the landscape plan, I'll show you later, there's a formal path that goes to the ADU. There's also access being proposed here, going up some pavers to the accessory dwelling unit. This area here represents the 30% slope area, and regarding the 40-foot contour line, and I'll show in enlarged detail of where the 40-foot contour line is, it does pass through part of the accessory dwelling unit. The reason for that condition is largely to avoid slopes greater than 30%. That's included in the coastal land use policies to minimize grading, and again, avoiding those higher slopes. And this area towards the rear of the property is all at 30%, so they're designing it outside of that area. I'll just walk you through some photos. This is on Allen Road, looking down towards the project site. This is that single-story residence. This is generally the area where the accessory dwelling unit is going to be proposed. Some additional context photos. These two properties are both abutting the project site, 3 Wade Court and 415 Allen Road. Just some other photos of the neighborhood. Both of these are across the street from the project site, so there's some 2-story buildings as well as some 1-story. Elings Park is visible in the background. This is the view of the backyard. Again, the existing residence. This is the location for the accessory dwelling unit. You can see there's pretty considerable slope towards the back. Okay, so not all accessory dwelling units are reviewed by the Single Family Design Board. Some of them are reviewed ministerially by staff outside of the coastal development permit that they're required for. As I explained, those go before the staff hearing officer typically, provided they meet certain architectural criteria. So this particular ADU was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board because it is 2 stories and the existing house is 1 story. So that's one of the criteria that they were not meeting. So the Single Family Design Board reviewed the project twice. At the initial hearing in November of 2023, the board provided comments generally noting support for the style to match the architectural style of the main residence, but did express concern about the size, bulk, scale, and height. They recommended the applicant study the plate heights to allow for a reduction in height, as well as to make some changes related to the upper story deck, which faces towards 415 Allen Road, as well as to study the rear elevation. Glazing was recommended. And to the right, you'll see an elevation, a side elevation showing that deck area. There's some exterior stairs. This is the entrance to the unit or primary entrance. It was reviewed again by the Single Family Design Board on December 4th, 2023. That's that same elevation. They did make some modifications to that upper story balcony as far as decreasing its size slightly. And at that hearing, the Single Family Design Board did note support for the mass, bulk, and scale given site topography. I do want to note prior to this hearing, city staff did recommend that the Single Family Design Board independently, so it wasn't a formal site visit, but go out on their own to visit the site to get an understanding of the neighborhood and site. At the Single Family Design Board, the applicant included in their packet photos of story poles as well as renderings to show that the ADU would sit as low as into the hillside as possible, which helped the Single Family Design Board find positive comments for the project. They also noted that the ADU is in conformance with the primary residence and thus the neighborhood, and the Single Family Design Board forwarded the project to the Planning Commission for review. I do want to note the applicant also did reduce the plate height slightly, so there was a slight reduction in height. This is the landscape plan. So as I mentioned, this is that parking space, a path going up to the accessory dwelling unit, a path this way as well, which accesses the unit. There's an at-grade patio here. These are the steps, which also go to the second floor of that unit. And as I mentioned, there's landscape proposed associated with the accessory dwelling unit, including retaining walls. This is a table reflecting the zoning ordinance consistency to show the project complies with the requirements for an ADU in terms of setbacks, building height, parking, open yard, and building separation. I do want to note as well that parking is not always required for an accessory dwelling unit, but it is for this particular one because it is in a key public access area due to its proximity to Arroyo Burro Beach, and that's outlined in the coastal land use plan. So therefore, an uncovered space is required for that unit, and they are providing that. Okay. So the project was reviewed by staff for consistency with the Coastal Act and Coastal Land Use Plan. As the project is in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone, this includes consistency with a number of policies, including visual resources. So you'll see a number of policies to the left, as well as a figure from the Coastal Land Use Plan Scenic Resources Diagram. This represents the project site here. So this map includes a map of scenic resources and what's called visual cones that identify desirable backgrounds in the city. Public views are resources viewed from public areas such as Cliff Drive, Parkland, like Elings Park, Douglas Family Preserve, the Pacific Ocean, and the shoreline. The project does not obstruct public scenic view corridors of scenic resources like the Pacific Ocean from the shoreline, nor Douglas Family Preserve or Elings Park, because it is being proposed in an area already developed with existing residential development, and it is behind an existing single-story residence. These are some renderings, and if you recall from just the last slide, some of the other components or policies include design review and compatibility. So these are some renderings that were provided to the Single-Family Design Board when the project was reviewed conceptually, just showing how it fits into the site generally. Another policy that is important to note, and this goes back to, again, that condition regarding the 40-foot contour line. So you'll see here, if you can see where my mouse is, hopefully, this line here represents the 40-foot contour line, so that cuts through part of the building, carrying through. So that 40-foot contour line included areas that were less than 30% slope, and the general policy that the city has is that we want to avoid slopes greater 30% or greater. Again, that's the identified pink area towards the back. And where avoidance is not feasible, minimize development in those areas. So the ADU is outside of that, minus the stairs, which are in that. To the right, you'll see the required open yard, so they're required to provide 1250. They are providing that, meeting their minimum dimensions of 20 by 20 as well. In terms of environmental review, the project qualifies for a CEQA exemption per Section 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures, which allows for a secondary dwelling unit. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission move to approve the coastal development permit and condition amendment subject to the findings and conditions outlined in your staff report, and confirm the environmental analyst's determination of exemption. That was also outlined in the staff report. Options for the Planning Commission to consider alternatively. You can also deny the project if you do not find it's appropriate based on the findings outlined in the staff report, or approve the project subject to conditions made by the Planning Commission. So as I said, we're recommending that that information was included in your staff report. I do have the findings here. So the project is consistent with the policies of the California Coastal Act and local coastal plan. Condition amendment that the Planning Commission finds that the proposed amendment to remove the condition that all future development shall be located between the 40-foot contour line and the public street, and the condition that all future development shall be limited to the residence, garage, drive-in, aggregate uses outlined in conditions of approval. And the record agreement is consistent with and does not change the findings by council in 2012. The subject lot is in an area of 1- and 2-story structures. Public services are available to serve that parcel, and development is sited such to avoid slopes greater than 30%. I do have an alternative finding for the Planning Commission to consider as well. That is also an option. So an alternative to the condition amendment finding that the Planning Commission may consider is that the Planning Commission finds the proposed amendment to remove the finding or condition specific to the 40-foot contour line is appropriate, and amends one of the conditions regarding future development So keeping all of the language to a single-story residence, garage, driveway, hardscape, and amending it to include allowing for an ADU. And that concludes my presentation. Here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Plummer. With that, we will go to the applicant presentation. Please identify yourself and the relationship to the project. You will have 15 minutes to present.
Maybe not supposed to touch that. I'm not that tall.
And Ms. Johnson, would you please start the timer when you're ready?
Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Trish Allen with SEPS. I just wanted to quickly introduce my project team. The owner, Sean Shirozi, is here behind me. Beth Collins with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck. Kate Svensson, the project designer, and Chris Gilliland, our landscape architect. We're going to start off with Ms. Collins to run through some comments about the development restriction, and then I'll run very quickly through the project slides.
Chair, Planning Commissioners, nice to see you this afternoon. I'm Beth Collins. We want to thank staff. Thank you all for your hard work on this project over the many years. As staff noted, normally we would not be here on an ADU. An ADU is not appealable to this body. So why are we here? Because, as you know, there are a suite of new state laws that reduce local control over various housing projects Why are we wouldn't normally be appealable is what I'm trying to say. We wouldn't be appealable because there are all these new state laws, which significantly limit your discretion. But today we're here because when this lot was created in 2012 and staff went through this, it resulted in a covenant, and that covenant was limiting future development on the lot. But things have changed since that covenant was set up. Two things in particular. One, the new state laws have made the covenant as it exists partially illegal, so that voids it, and it needs to be fixed. Two, a new large home was constructed next to my client's home, which has some pretty significant negative impacts to both my client and his family. So my client, Sean Shirozi, lives and takes care of his elderly mom and his brother. His mom lives in the master bedroom. Sean and his brother Ali, who is severely disabled and uses a wheelchair, they live in the back bedrooms. And so that's how they're living right now in the main house. Sean is proposing this ADU for two reasons. One, to provide some additional living space and privacy for him and his family. I think some of you noted on the site visit that the ADU, and this is fairly unusual, has an elevator, and that's to accommodate his brother and his wheelchair. The second reason that this ADU is being proposed is that when Sean built his house, before the Shaws built their house at 23 Wade Road. You're going to see some photos that'll kind of bring this to life. You probably saw it if you went to the site visit. So unfortunately, due to the topography and the design of the Shaw's home, it really looms over Sean's house. They have a direct view into his dining room, kitchen, living room, master bedroom, where his mom is, and the brother Ali's bedroom. So it's very limited privacy due to this house looming. So our design team's going to come up and talk to you about this, but the ADU was very carefully designed. It was reviewed by SFDB. It was found to be appropriately sited and designed. And it complies with all the city's objective standards. You saw that up on the, and that's very important now under these new state housing laws. It also complies with all the city's hillside and other development standards. And this condition unreasonably limits the development on the lots. So I'm going to tell you more about that. There were 3 letters that were submitted. It has a long, long list. I don't know if some of you saw this, but one of the letters, the letter by Carol Shaw, which is the large house above, has a bunch of typed names on the letter. I'm not sure how these names were gathered. It's not clear what representations were made. But unfortunately, it is clear from reviewing those three letters that there does seem to be some consensus. The neighbors do appear to support ADUs generally in the neighborhood, and they seem to support an ADU on this property. And even in this location, it seems like the real rub is a second-story ADU. And so they're asking this PC to change the condition to make the ADU a one-story ADU. And they're citing concerns about private views and kind of the development pattern in the neighborhood. And they're saying, this is my interpretation of it, they're saying, well, it was a deal that was made, so you should stick with the deal. And I would say two big things have changed. The state laws have changed, limiting the legality of that deal or condition. And then the second piece is that the construction of that other home has really changed the neighborhood. So some might say, what's all this big deal about just one unit? But one unit is one unit, and we get the housing crisis dealt with one unit at a time. This is a very appropriate location. You'll see from our design team, which I'm now about to kick it to, it's a well-designed ADU that actually is very respectful to the neighbors. So I'll let them pitch that instead of me. Okay, thanks.
Well, I'm not the designer, but the designer here is here for your questions. So I do want to run through the slides, and I'm going to go quickly because you have seen some of these. Okay, thank you. That's just the cover sheet. So Ms. Plummer gave a thorough overview of the project and went through these slides, so I'll go quickly. The front of the residence, different vantage points. Again, the driveway and where the vehicle is parked, it would be approximate location for the new parking stall to serve the ADU. 23 Wade Court is in the background there. We'll see it pretty much in every slide, a view of the backyard. Again, as Ms. Plummer noted, you can see the location of the proposed footprint, and then beyond that, the slope increases towards the fence there. Various views. This is the proposed site plan. Ms. Plummer went over this in terms of the pink area being the 30% or greater slope. One of the reasons the structure was designed and sited in this area and as a two-story structure was to be able to accommodate a 1,000 square foot ADU, but within the buildable envelope of the property and staying away from the 30% slope. So 1,000 square feet is not a lot. In fact, Mr. Shirozi wanted a larger ADU, and we presented a 1,200 square foot ADU to the Single Family Design Board, and they said no. That would have required a modification, and so we did go back and redesign and lower the square footage to what's allowed within those standards. A couple changes were also made through the review with Single Family Design Board, and I think this section shows it pretty well in terms of implementing guidelines to, lower this ADU into the hillside. It does require some grading and some retaining, but the idea was to nestle this structure into that hillside to achieve neighborhood compatibility. And that's why we're here today, because we were able to, satisfy the Single Family Design Board with their review of what's compatible, mass, bulk, and scale. And as Ms. Collins mentioned, or maybe it was Ms. Plummer, we did install story poles so that we could really understand the relationship of the building to the site and make sure that we were showing that information. And I have some visuals for that too. The elevations, all this is in your packet. We can go back if you have any questions about design. This is a section, I'm sorry, I don't know if this shows up. It's hard to use a mouse and stand here. So one of the comment letters mentioned the potential for shading on an adjacent lot over here on the north side of our property. And so we did cut a section through to show the solar access line and sort of the distance that the the ADU is away from that property line. So I'm just not seeing any concern with shading these adjacent properties to the north of the subject site. This is when the story poles were put up for us to take a look at, again, where the structure is sitting into the site. Flip through these very quickly. We're up at the steepest part of the lot looking down. We weren't able to take photos from the adjacent neighbor. They did take photos at the time these poles were put up and showed the photo at SFDB hearing. We weren't able to obtain that photo, but it was shown during the hearing, and it made a difference to the single-family design board that they weren't concerned about any, private view blockage from that neighbor. And this is so hard to see, I apologize. Hopefully you could see it better on your monitors, but these are the story poles that are at the ridge line that are just barely poking above the roof line of the main residence, as taken from the street and a little bit further away. Again, the arrows are somewhat visible there. The renderings that were previously shown, and I think I will turn it over to Chris to quickly walk you through the landscape plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allen.
Madam Chair, Commissioners. So I'll real quickly go through the landscape plan. Really, we were just trying to strike a balance between, beautifying the site, which is currently bare, providing some slope stabilization with plantings, appropriate plantings, and addressing privacy issues while still maintaining views. And as Trish mentioned, we're trying to nestle, and the landscape will help to nestle this house into the site with drought-tolerant native and Mediterranean and succulent plantings. And also, as I mentioned, to provide deep-rooted planting to mitigate any erosion concerns. We also have shown strategically placed trees and a mixed native. Sure. So strategically placed trees, we have jacaranda here, Arbutus marina, and I believe an olive over here. And along the outside, we have a mixed native hedge planting, again, to help with the privacy issue and also maintain views. And really, that's about it. I mean, there was already mentioned about the hardscape elements, stairs coming up, walkway over to the front door, and also the stairs that then ascend to the top as well. So, open any questions.
And Beth's going to wrap up.
Okay. Turn it back over to Beth. Thanks.
I think we'll reserve the rest of our time for rebuttal or questions if you have any, but the sum up is we would like the condition removed, the B and C condition. It's partially illegal. Things have changed. This is an important unit to have and add to the city of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the applicant team for your presentation. Ms. Johnson, would you let us know how much time the applicant has remaining on their timer?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. The applicant has 2 minutes and 25 seconds remaining.
Great. So Ms. Allen and your team, you will have 2 minutes and 25 seconds left if you choose to respond to any of the public comments after public comment portion has been concluded. So please keep that in mind. With that, let's go to comments from members of the public pertaining to this specific item. Ms. Johnson, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. At this time, I do have 4 requests to speak, so we'll go ahead and start with Carol Shaw. If you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll have Cameron Shaw to follow.
Good afternoon. Does the timer, you guys have to let me know because this is when the timer goes off. Okay.
Ms. Shaw, can you pull your microphone down just a little bit? Perfect.
And you'll be able to see the time on that screen right there as well.
Maybe I don't want to. All right, I'll start. I cannot impress enough on this commission how offensive it is to us and this neighborhood to push the limits of California's ADU policy and invalidate the limits imposed by a hard-won recorded agreement that permitted the creation of 425 Allen Road. In a sense, the residence at 425 is the ADU of 415 Allen when permission was granted for a smaller parcel with a sloped yard. Then, conditioned on restrictions, the agreement expanded development density from what previously existed. Had the neighborhood envisioned that anyone would propose a design on this scale, it would have put the brakes on the lot split. The agreement in its history presents a situation that is distinguishable from the ordinary or any other ADU application. The concerns of 2014 remain true to today. The agreement was meant to be enduring to protect neighbors from the vicissitudes of changing policies and unchecked overbuilding. The two-story ADU proposed by Nail File Properties, LLC, the Delaware company whose name appears on the grant deed, takes advantage of the politics of the day and elbows in under the cloak of ADU legislation. But state law also gives Santa Barbara latitude to make determinations in circumstances such as this as to how the ADU is built when specific designs negatively impact neighbors. Please don't allow the second story. This committee can rely on the ordinance that triggers design review for a two-story ADU proposed on a one-story, when there's a residence on a one-story parcel, a one-story residence on a parcel. By relying on the ordinance and sending the project back to the board, the commission can honor the core covenant of one story. Further, the applicant did not provide the board full disclosure of the agreement during their public meetings or application until now. This is an opportunity to renew community trust in the city's promises and trust in recorded agreements it enters into on our behalf. We do not oppose an ADU on the lot. There are other designs and types of ADUs that serve the directives of the state and the applicant without betraying the intent and spirit of this agreement. It was not meant to be a temporary ceasefire. It has perceived permanence like any recorded instrument. We relied on it because it's binding on successors and assigns to protect privacy and ensure the stability of our hillside. Unless the one-story restriction is applied with this knowledge, the proposed design with its exterior staircase and hillside siding will harm the uphill neighbors, loss of privacy, reduction in the quality of life. Our personal decisions relied on awareness of this agreement, and such as how our home was sited and how it was designed. Please weigh carefully the desires of one lot owner during a time of changing circumstances against the reliance of a community on its institutions and contracts. Do not unnecessarily invalidate the restriction. And by the way, the main house has been vacant for the 5 years it's been there on 425 Allen. And if you asked any of the 74 people in the neighborhood that, you know, what the circumstances are, I think it's being presented to you in a way that's not really quite what the neighborhood observes. And I really thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Okay, up next we'll have Cameron Shaw, and then we'll have Robin D. Smith to follow.
So, how you guys doing?
Please go ahead.
Just start? Okay. Agreement relating to the subdivision map of real property located at 425 Allen Road, dated September 9th, 2012. We did not realize until this Planning Commission hearing how the Santa Barbara approval process seems to work. When we asked, we were told that the purview of single-family board only was to decide aesthetics. So the agreement in question was brushed aside. We were given to understand that the fundamental issues and questions come later. We relied on this. My wife even said to the staff planner, "Isn't that putting the cart before the horse?" It seems that most of the heavy lifting went on behind closed doors to produce the staff report and the recommendations. If this commission gives undue deference to the staff recommendation to allow a two-story ADU, the commission will be shortchanging the neighborhood and the abutters. Please do not override the recorded agreement. The applicant has other design alternatives for its ADU. Please honor the restriction at the core of this agreement. Uphold the single-story restriction.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, up next we'll have Robin D. Smith, and then we'll have Deborah Elaine Gibson to follow.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? My name's Robin Smith. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, so I guess that makes me one of those rare native Santa Barbarians. My family moved from Sunset Road to 9 Solana Court when I was 14. It's been my home ever since. And Solana Court is the next street over from Wade. While much of the soul of Santa Barbara remains, I've frequently been dismayed at some of the permitted developments, and I know I'm not the only person who's ever asked, how did that get permitted? I'm sad for people who have had multi-story homes built next to theirs, resulting in loss of privacy, loss of light, loss of their homes as they knew them. I actually was very upset that the two-story white giant house at 23 Wade Court was allowed to be built. It now blocks half of what used to be my little piece of sky, replacing that sky's beauty with giant walls and roofs. And I regret not speaking up against it when I had the chance. So this new project, if it was approved at 2 stories, would essentially ruin what remains of my little bit of sky, as evidenced by one of those story poles photographs. But more importantly, it would set another precedent that could lead to my next-door neighbors on Solana Court adding second stories. And if that came to pass, I would be in the same situation as the poor folks behind the Shoreline Drive monstrosities. This next paragraph I'm going to not read because I've learned all this, and it's just repetitive what we know about the previous agreement. But my sort of bottom line kind of comes to, why can't we honor agreements that were made? And I've heard reasons, so I'm just going to leave that out and proceed with, I'll also agree with what Carol said, that folks do not live in this house full-time, and it was not built as an affordable unit. I've watched it go up. It's just not that way. And given the neighborhood we live in, any ADU that might be rented would command top dollar. So given the fact that this particular ADU, in my opinion, won't do anything to alleviate homelessness in Santa Barbara, but it would serve to potentially enrich the owners at the expense of their neighbors, I'm opposed to the 2 stories. Because the applicants could gain financially, while we would lose the precious ambiance of our neighborhood, and because of the ominous precedent it could set, I ask that the project be amended. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, up next, we'll have Deborah Elaine Gibson.
Hi, I'm Deborah. Can you hear me? Let's see. Is that better? So it's interesting in all those pictures that my house doesn't even show up. It looks like there's 415 Wade Allen Road, 23 Wade Court, the ADU place, and just lots of land. But my house, from my house, above my fence, I see Sean's current house, the one at 415 Allen Road. So that's already in my view. And then a 2-story ADU would be crazy. So my family has lived at 11 Wade Court since 1978. We were friends with the next-door neighbors at 3 Wade Court, and they lived there since 1965. And so it was those 2 people that made the agreement, my mom at 11 Wade Court and our neighbor Sylvia next door with Andy Seibold. So he wanted to have a retirement home at the 415 Allen Road. There was a slope between where 415 is and where coming up to where my house is that was a grade that the commission didn't want. But they signed off on it, and, we were being neighborly to let them do that. But the agreement was, and Andy Seibold did keep that agreement. That agreement is on the deed. I know Pilar has mentioned that she's seen that, and that I don't know if she seemed to say at one of these meetings that there was a legal issue between the ADU and having this on the deed, because it is on the deed, and they're not supposed to have more than a single story, and that was why we agreed to that. So 425, 415, so 415 wouldn't have ever been built had we not had that agreement. So having the ADU be even taller than the roof of Sean's house already is distressing to me. So there was one place where you could see a little chimney, and that's my house. So my house is lower, but then I see out of that view, and I like, whatever her name is, sorry. Huh? Robin. So she's on that court, I'm in the next court, and so I have a view that's beautiful of the trees on the Douglas Preserve, and that will be obliterated by Sean's ADU. And I don't know if that's a concern with you guys, but of course it is to me. And Sylvia's house and our house were part of the original tract. So all the houses pretty much around me are no longer, they're all just newer. So there's a whole difference for me and our family in the neighborhood. So I don't really like having the ADU there at all, but I certainly would appreciate it if at least it could just stay single story and not 2 stories. And it'd be nice if those poles, you could see them from my house, because they're going to be, right where my house is. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Johnson, do we have anyone online that would like to make public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. If you'd like to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but we did receive written correspondence from Brian Walker and Eve Moscato, Era Harris, Carol Shaw, and a petition with 52 signatures, which were distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Vice.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, we did receive one more speaker slip for Brian Walker. If you can make your way up to the podium.
Sure, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Hi there, how's everybody doing? So I probably don't even need the timer, I won't be that long. So I'm the owner of 3 Wade Court, so it's one of those properties that was described as one of those ones you didn't really see. It does share that, so this is the direct neighbor, in those photographs where you saw the cars parked, it's directly to the right of that. So I guess that would technically be north. And so I think you heard of the Shaws, or a little higher up, then you hear the ADU, Sean's, and I'm the one that's kind of further down the hill. And what I just wanted to express was my concern around the second story. I very much understand the need for ADUs and support that. But with the second story, it's looking right down into our backyard and into our living room. And that's my main concern I want to express. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Nope. Okay, great. Given that the applicant has 2.5 minutes roughly, would the applicant like to use any of their remaining time to address any of the public comments that have been made?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Beth Collins again. Quickly, from listening to the neighbors, and thank you all for your comments, it sounds like generally, folks are okay with lifting the restriction on development from the 40-foot contour line to the public street. It's just the second story element that is giving some consternation. But unfortunately, the city, one, doesn't protect private views. We do have a single-family design board process. The single-family design board unanimously approved this project. And then the last point is the state laws are what they are. The city cannot restrict ADUs from being constructed with the covenant as it is written. ADUs must be approved if they comply with objective standards, and this one does. But if it gives you some at least comfort, there was a single-family design board process. The client participated in it. We did reduce the size. We also took some other measures to accommodate these concerns raised by SFDB. So we think in the end, it's a respectful ADU. And we hope that you eliminate the conditions as requested and recommended by staff. I'll reserve the rest of the time in case people have questions and things.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Okay, at this point, we will turn to my fellow commissioners for questions. And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, I don't know, maybe Ms. Allen, could someone put up the slide that shows the open yard, please? No, not that one. Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it. Okay.
I sit here, I can zoom in too.
Okay, so that is a compliant open yard for the ADU, is that correct? Yeah. right, Ms. Plummer? Yes, she's nodding her head. Yeah.
Through the chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, that's meeting the required open yard.
Okay, and the stairs are all right in the open yard, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so has anyone on the design team explored what we saw in the public comment letters was no one objected to a one-story ADU. Have you explored one story with perhaps an open yard modification? Which I think we're allowed to do, right? Is that right, Ms. Ostringer? We can do it could be a one-story ADU with an open yard modification.
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, because of the state law, generally, if they're allowed 2 stories, they get the 2 stories.
Okay, so why are we here?
It's really just to remove to clean up the covenant, because the portion of the covenant relating to the ADU is void because of state law. And I believe there's also the contour line issue.
There is, and that, according to the staff report, is not, that could still be in effect. That, according to what I think the staff report said, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the staff report said that condition 2C, future development of the lot shall be limited to the following, blah, 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 is no longer enforceable. But I think that all future development should be located between the 40-foot contour line and the public street. Isn't that still enforceable?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, is the state law that voids the portion of the covenant that restricts the ADU says that a covenant can't unreasonably restrict construction of an ADU. And in this case, because it was determined by staff that because it could be sited at a different location outside of the contour line, that covenant condition was still valid.
Because the 40-foot contour line goes through the ADU.
Which is why, to have the ADU built this way, you have to remove that covenant.
Right, okay. So I guess my question is, I don't understand why I know the city doesn't protect private views, Ms. Collins said so, and I understand that, but we do have good neighbor policies, and we have neighbors here that have said they're perfectly willing to have an ADU there. They'd just like it to be 1 story, not 2 stories. So I guess my question is, did you ever explore that to possibly deal with the objection from the neighbors? Because what I'm seeing here is Ms. Shaw said that you relied on the reliability of the agreement that was made back in 2011, and that kind of sticks with me a little bit. So
that is not correct. And we had several hearings with Single Family Design Review Board, and obviously the desire to have a single-story structure being built instead of a 2-story structure came up on the first hearing, and we did explore the possibility of doing so. Unfortunately for us, we have a very small envelope outside of the 30% slope on this area. So to construct an ADU of allowable square footage, which is 1,000 square feet, would create basically a tunnel structure, which is not pleasant, not compatible with the neighborhood. So we went ahead and redesigned, lowered the plate, lowered the ADU finished floor, decreased the size, removed the balconies where we could remove them, and came back, and Single Family Design Review Board unanimously agreed that this was a preferred design for this lot to decrease the amount of grading, disturbance to the slope, and to actually present with a structure that was appealing.
Okay, but you never did really explore a 1-story ADU that maybe involved an open yard modification?
No, internally we did. That's how we knew that this design was.
Single Family Design Board never saw that?
No, we have discussions, verbal discussions, but they've never seen that design.
And how big would the ADU be if it were 1 story and you had an open yard modification?
It would be about 18 foot wide by 60, 70 foot long tunnel ADU.
So, okay, I'll have to do the math. Someone do the math. I can't do that math in my head.
I mean, imagine, Yeah, where's the thing?
It's,
50 by 50 wide by 20 by 50.
it would be what?
Imagine, can I use a mouse?
It'd be 50 by 20.
1,080?
So imagine this square. Can you see my mouse?
She said 18 by 50 or 60, right?
It would be 20 by 50.
Imagine this square, this line of the ADU continuing further out like this.
Okay.
And going all the way closer and closer to the main residence. And that was another issue we had to deal with. We tried to provide as much separation from the main residence as well as possible. In fact, this ADU is further away from any other neighboring structure than it is from the main residence of this house. And the closer we get to it, the more we stabilize the slope and the retaining walls that's currently holding that slope. So we tried to find the perfect.
I'm looking at the contours, and I'm a retired landscape architect. The contours are pretty even going across there, so it's not, okay. So, okay, well, you've answered my question, and I guess the answer is no, you never did really explore that, one story.
We did explore. We did not present.
Well,
it.
internally you explored it, yeah. And it looks like it would have been the same size, actually, and you would have eliminated an elevator in it. But I think based on what you said, what did we decided, 1,000? Yeah, yeah, so it would be about the same size, and you wouldn't have the elevator, which would mean it would probably be even larger. But I guess what I'm hearing from Ms. Ostringer is that's nothing we can rely on here. Ms. Ostringer, what happens to this if we were to, if we were not to support this? I'm just curious.
The covenant amendment could be appealed to the city council, or since it's the covenant with regards to the ADU is void, they could choose to redesign the project in a way that wouldn't require planning commission approval and just build it and leave the covenant would remain in place. It would just be void.
Okay. And then would they get their coastal development permit from
The staff
hearing officer?
yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to explore all possibilities here because I felt that it shouldn't be deliberating, but I felt that the public comment letters were very amenable to having a one-story structure here. So that's where my questions were going. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Commissioner Wiscombe's comments and questions that answered most of mine. But I want a clarification on a couple of pieces. So if the ADU had been proposed as a one-story ADU, would it have come to us at all?
Through the chair, Commissioner Ball, it would depend where they're proposing it, number one, because there is a condition amendment saying that no development shall be sited where the 40-foot contour line is located. So if they were to propose a one-story building in this location, it would still come before you for the condition amendment. What might not have occurred is single-family design board review, because again, there's certain architectural criteria that make design review ministerial rather than discretionary. So specifically, there's one criteria that says you can't exceed the main height or stories of the main house. So this went before design review, the single-family design board, because it is a two-story. So if they were to make it one, it would likely just be here for the condition amendment. Yeah.
Thank you. And what would be the minimum square footage for an ADU on this site?
The minimum square footage for a standard ADU is 400 square feet.
And the proposed is about 1,000 square feet, is that what I'm seeing?
1,000, that's correct.
Okay. And if it was one story, so again, minus the elevator, and if it was at the about 18 to 60, that's about 1,000 square feet. So it wouldn't change the square footage, correct?
Yeah, I do also want to add as a point, so you'll see that they're showing their 1,250 square feet of open yard. So they're compliant now. You know, if they were to redesign the structure in the current location, we'd have to see what that looks like in terms of meeting open yard. I can't tell if it would need an open yard modification or not. They'd have to design it, and then we would look at that. But it might require a open yard modification, which would also be a discretionary approval that was needed.
Thank you. Shifting to a couple of different questions. In the staff report, it mentions Tier 2 and Tier 3 stormwater being on site, and I understand Tier 3 requirements were under the building permit for the residents that hasn't been completely addressed, and that's outstanding. And Tier 2 would come into play with the proposed ADU. And if this were to be, to move forward as proposed, I understand that that would be addressed during the normal part of the process, or would that need to be in conditions of approval?
Through Vice Chair, Commissioner Ball, yes. So during the internal review, when the city's looking at the accessory dwelling unit prior to application completeness, we did route this to the Creeks Division for review, and they determined that the accessory dwelling unit qualifies for Tier 2. However, the building permit for the primary residence had Tier 3 requirements, and they're required to finalize those under this application if it moves forward.
Thank you. And then looking at the request for the amendment to the conditions of approval again, just thinking ahead because of some of the public comment about this is a change to what was understood over a decade ago. So you gave the option to add the ADU to the future development condition. So if that were added, would it be in compliance with kind of new state legislation and local ordinances?
Through the Vice Chair, Commissioner Ball, the conditions, there's two conditions, right, that were included in the recorded agreement. One about the 40-foot contour line, and then as far as the second one, the future development, which is an unreasonable restriction because it says you can't have anything beyond the residence garage and hardscape improvements. If that were kept but amended to include and an ADU, then it would be in compliance.
Thank you. And because it is in an area where it's 3 dwelling units per acre are allowed, would they be able to put a 3rd dwelling unit on that property?
No.
Okay, thank you. And then I think this is my last question. I went back and watched most.
Yeah, actually, apologies. So in terms of accessory dwelling units, when they're developed with single family, there is the option to do a junior ADU as well, but I do want to specify that there's certain criteria to meet that 2-unit option. So I don't believe that you'd be able to do this particular type of ADU. When you do the 2-unit option, you get a special accessory dwelling unit that does have height constraints, height limitations, as well as size limitations. And then you're allowed to do a junior ADU, which is just conversion of floor area. So they would need to convert part of either the garage or the house to the junior ADU. That would be the only way they'd be able to achieve that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Boss, just to keep in the back of your mind as you're looking at the covenants, there is a bill that's going through right now that would allow for multiple ADUs on a property and also would take away the requirement for a CDP in the coastal zone. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. There's obviously never a guarantee that any of these will pass, but when crafting the condition, we want to be careful because we might, if we say ADU, and the state law comes, would be void again. So that's just something to think about.
Thank you. And then I went back and watched some of the meetings beyond the minutes, and I understand that in 2009, 2010, I think it was staff was directed to consider this site for an affordable unit or affordable housing, and in 2012, staff noted that they determined it was not a good location for affordable housing, and I couldn't find more insight on that. Do you have any?
Thank you. Through the Vice Chair, Commissioner Ball, yes. If I'm remembering correctly, and it was included in the staff report from that time in the presentation, they did not find it appropriate because usually we were looking at areas that already are designed for higher density in the city, and this area is not one of those.
Thank you. I do recall a council member voiced that. Sorry, just checking. I don't have any. I think those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I just want to point out that the dwelling unit could also be expanded to what I think is the west, where there's patio and open space there, and wouldn't have to so much intrude on the open yard part of it. I don't have a problem with removing or amending the conditions to allow. Oh. I don't have a problem with amending the conditions to allow the ADU, but I do have a real problem with the second story. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Do I have any other questions for my fellow commissioners? No? All right, I have one question for the applicant. If the owner could come up to the podium, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Thank you. So just one question. So when you, what year was it? Could you remind the commission what year you purchased the home?
2000, I built the home.
Built the home, yeah.
I purchased a lot in 2015. We began construction in 2016. I think it was done in 2018.
Great. And were you always aware of this covenant and the specifics around limiting further development?
At that point, it was brought to my, yes, I was informed of it, but I know that state law, I was not considering, I would have liked to build the ADU, but I believe that at that point, I wasn't allowed. But as my team has expressed, laws have changed, and if I can rightfully build one, then I would like to.
And understanding the kind of the feedback that we've gotten from your neighbors, and there was a lot of public comment around wanting to be neighborly and trying to assist in this. Given that there's some significant concern around a two-story, but they are open to a one-story, obviously Ms. Ostringer has really laid out for us the restrictions that this commission has in terms of the ADU policy that exists at the state level now. Would you be open to reconsidering a one-story ADU?
We actually did. If I could elaborate on that a little bit. Like, for example, Ms. Gibson, which mentioned to the right, if we actually extend the ADU on towards where the open yard is, she will actually see, it will become very visible from her yard. I have actually gone and stood in front of her fence, and what she mentioned as a concern about the preserve, there's absolutely going to be no obstruction looking from her house to the preserve. The ADU is going to be to the right of her vision line. Right now she can see the preserve straight. This is going to be to the right. But since it's at an angle, if we actually build it backwards, it will block her view. So that was actually being neighborly and consistent. Again, everybody can get up here and say whatever they want. You have to assess to see whether it's true. I'm so grateful that you were all at the property and you saw. The reason you cannot see 3 Wade Court and Gibson's house is because they are so far to the right. There's not going to be a shadow problem. Again, they're coming and they're saying things. And then the biggest public comment came from 23 Wade Court, which you saw. You have allowed them to build they have built within the 6-foot line, right on the 6-foot line, looking into my house. I have not gone into my backyard for the past 3 years. That's why she's saying that there's nobody living there. I had my blinds shut just when you were there. She can see into my living room. She can see what I'm watching on TV. She can see my brother being naked, being changed or whatever with his diapers on the bed. My mom has shut her blinds. They are completely intruding. They have completely taken away my privacy, my mother's privacy, my brother's privacy. And I cannot even believe this was built. I never got one of those blue notifications that you sent out. Neither have a lot of the other neighbors. Nobody got. Those poles went up, and it was too late to do anything about it. But I feel so violated and discriminated. And for them to have the nerve to come up here, and these 50 names that are on that sheet, they're not signatures. They're just names that she just listed on there. So, thank you, sorry.
So I just
Thank
add
you.
one thing to that response is a one-story structure can be 16 feet. Your objective standards are up to 30 feet, and ours is at 21. So a one-story structure can be 16 feet, and we're proposing 21 feet. So just to put it in context here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering my questions. I'm going to check one more time. Any other questions from my fellow commissioners? All right. Before I open the floor for deliberations, I would like to take a moment to review what we would need to cover today. This project requests a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, an amendment to the conditions of approval associated with the underlying subdivision, and confirmation of the environmental analysis determination that the project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA. To keep this process as efficient as possible, I would like to ask my fellow commissioners for comments first, so we can make it all the way through commissioner deliberations before entertaining a motion. I will now turn to my fellow commissioners for their comments. Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually want to ask another question, if I may, and I should have
totally
asked it
fine.
when you asked if we had more questions. I'm just trying to understand why we're here and you know, what we can do under state law and what we can't do under state law. So if you go, Ms. Ostringer, if you can go to page 58 of 74, that's the City Council draft conditions of approval from January 31st, 2012. And if you go to 2B, all future development shall be located between the 40-foot contour line and the public street. That condition would have to be removed because the 40-foot contour line goes through the project, correct? Yes, yes, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Collins is nodding yes, and I know that's true. Okay, so if we deleted 2B, or asked that that be stricken from the conditions, and then we move on to 2C, which is on the next page, which we're being told is non-enforceable because we have a state law that says you can build ADUs. But we have conditions of a single-story residence not to exceed blah, 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 a garage not to exceed a driveway and landscaping. And then we added a condition to that for single-story ADU or ADUs per state law, which would maybe cover something in the future, but we put in the word single-story, and then we made a note that we would be amenable to an open yard modification. Can we do that? Am I giving you a headache, Ms. Ostringer?
I'm trying to, Chair Wiscombe, I'm trying to think of what that would do. So to be clear, you would remove the 40-foot contour line?
Correct. So the ADU can actually be constructed, you know, where it is, but then stretched out into the open yard and be single-story. That was what I was thinking.
And specify the single story?
Yes, that's probably the key.
Yeah, I think you could, yes, I think you could probably, we could probably do that. Go ahead.
Hi, unfortunately, no. Objective standards, we comply with the city's objective standards, and an ADU, you can't put a restriction on an ADU beyond your city objective standards.
Just one, if you can give me just a couple minutes, I'm
Yeah,
rereading the ADU
that's
ordinance.
fine. I'm just throwing it out there because I'm not really sure. I almost feel like we're here for a rubber stamp if that's, I don't know what else to say. I don't know why we're here. I thought that this was kind of a negotiation point. Okay, so.
Chair
let-
Wardlow, could we take 5?
So let's take a 5-minute break. Ms. Ostringer, let's give her some time. Thank you all so much. Everyone's back, so we'll be reconvening now at 3:45. So I'd like to pick up where we left off. Ms. Ostringer, do you want to give us a readout on what you decided?
Chair and Commissioners, I really appreciate the 5-minute break that turned into probably 15 minutes. It's actually, we were really, with staff, looking into this. We want to make sure that we give you the best advice, hearing what you say. So we'd really like the opportunity, and the applicant is okay with this if we continue this indefinitely, so that we can really research the law and make sure that we give you all the options.
I appreciate that answer. That sounds like a good option. So I'll move that to, is that, can I do that?
You can make a motion to continue.
Yeah, I'll make that
indefinitely.
motion.
I'll
Do we have a
second.
second? Great. Ms. Johnson, can we get a roll call vote?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wardlow. I'll take roll call vote. Commissioner DeLucia?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell?
Yeah, yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yes.
Commissioner Boss?
Yes.
Vice Chair Wardlow?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you all for the time and attention on this. We appreciate it. So with that, that closes this item, and we will move to the administrative portion of our agenda now. Do we have any committee or liaison reports?
Yes, we do have a staff hearing officer liaison report regarding a project at 711 Bath Street. It was denied by the staff hearing officer on February 7th. And that project has, or the decision has been appealed and is tentatively scheduled to come to the Planning Commission in May. So just recommend watching that staff hearing officer hearing around 711 Bath Street again on February 7th.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Commissioner Lodge, do you have a report, or is this from before?
No, this is a report on a pre-application consultation with the ABR on March 4th, just a couple of days ago, about the Macy's site project. This is, what is it, 600, I might write down some of the important things. Anyway, 642 units in buildings that go up to 6-story buildings, 74 feet. And one ABR member said, "I'm overwhelmed, having a hard time stretching ABR goals to fit. I'm concerned about livability," and pointed out the architect presented the design and the layout, and there are paseos through the site and open courtyards, but Board Member 6 pointed out that they're going to be, with these 6-story buildings, they're going to be in permanent shade, some of them, and he was very concerned about the livability. Board Member Whalen was in general agreement with Board Member 6, and site overbuilt despite state laws, overwhelming to buildings to the south. And holding up for expressing our Santa Barbara style. Board Member Black, at first glance, he liked what he sees, variation from Hope to Plaza Way. He also said Main Plaza in the shade all the time. And Board Member Suffren, great opportunity, little homogeneous, excited about what it does. And Anderson, similar to Suffren, no problem with the heights. They did say that they would, in the discussion, remove part of a building, says there would be a park, open park area, and this was as a result of the open house they had and the comments made from the public about, families having some play, assuming there are families there, the children or adults as well, that there'd be more open space. So this, of course, will ultimately be coming to the Planning Commission, but not for a while.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Barnwell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a report from one of the committees that I follow, but I want to beat this drum relentlessly. And it's to staff and it's to all of us. I don't think we are well prepared for conversations on housing. And we're going to have a meeting with the city council. And I think it might behoove us as the planners, before the meeting with the council, if we could have a discussion of some of the ramifications that are associated with it. It came up at the housing discussion. I don't want to talk about them because I don't want to have a meeting right here, but I wondered who the powers that be are that we could we could become experts in this, so that when we go to the council meeting, we're not all at sea with some of the terms and what the concepts are, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. I definitely agree with you, and I think that's part of the reason why Chair Bauke has put onto our agenda as a standing item, discussion on subcommittee and workshops. But given that he is not here today, we will table that discussion to the next hearing. But I do think it makes sense that we have more of a robust discussion on how can this commission be more prepared to address, these more complex conversations around housing. So in the next meeting, let's definitely dive into that with Chair Bauke. Does anyone else have any other reports, or are we good to go? Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's now 3:52. That concludes our March 7th, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, March 14th. Thank you all for being here today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.